Climate policy experts are accusing the two major political parties of looting the Climate Emergency Response Fund for short-term political gain. National's diverting $2 billion from the fund to help pay for its tax cuts, while Labor's siphoning hundreds of millions to boost the government coffers. Climate correspondent Isabel Ewing reports.
It's meant to be a pot of money dedicated to helping New Zealand adapt to the impacts of a warming world and to cut our emissions as per our international commitment. But the election campaign is calling and the climate change kitty is ripe for the robbing by both National...
Reprioritising the revenue raised by the emissions trading scheme.
It's a cash raid on a fund which was set up to move New Zealand towards a low-carbon economy.
And by Labour, who've seemingly forgotten this from the old boss.
And today is a really important day as New Zealand has declared a climate emergency.
The Labour Party pulling back some of that money is concerning because it is a bit of a slippery slope, but the National Party announcement is essentially to disestablish the fund entirely and put the money into other things.
The Climate Emergency Response Fund is funded by the Emissions Trading Scheme, which charges polluters to help fund reducing greenhouse gas pollution. So far, it's helped pay for more bus drivers and to support industries to switch to cleaner heat.
This is a really hard, gnarly, long-term problem we have that's going to require a lot of investment, and that tends to get derailed by the priorities of the day.
Cue the derailing. National declared this week it wants to divert $2 billion of ETS revenue to pay for its tax cuts, calling it a climate dividend. But experts say that's disingenuous.
Because of the negative effects for climate policy, I regard it as effectively climate change denial.
Jeff Bertram views it as robbing future generations for short-term political gain instead of implementing a real climate dividend.
A climate change dividend or a carbon dividend would be paid to stakeholders. Now, ordinary New Zealanders are stakeholders. Future generations, in a way, are stakeholders. So, in a way, kids are stakeholders as well.
An example overseas is Canada's carbon or climate dividend, which returns all carbon tax revenue directly back to households, making it easier for politicians to sell a rising carbon price to the public. For example, the pain of paying more at the petrol pump is offset by the fact that you're getting a bigger climate dividend back.
The only party proposing that policy in New Zealand is ACT. Labour, meanwhile, want to dig into the fund they themselves labelled dedicated funding for climate and chuck hundreds of millions back into the general government coffers.
I think it's just nonsense as well. It's exactly the same problem that we have with National. The major parties simply are not really focused on climate change as an issue.
The fund is also supposed to pay for New Zealand's adaptation to the impacts of climate change.
And we've seen the dire need for that after Cyclone Gabrielle in particular, and I'm quite worried about where that adaptation funding is going to come from now.
Climate change, only an emergency it would seem, until it's time to chase votes. Isabel Ewing, Newshub.